It's a pleasure to see you all here today, fulfilling the sweet dream of DAC hubs that are becoming a reality. Who has a mind to disagree, after all? Or so they say. Anyway, we're here to talk about the implications of the recent DAC Hub announcement that stands to catalyze the practice of direct air capture in the United States, knowing that, again, in AirMiners, we focus on many different methods of carbon removal. But this particular event is focused exclusively on direct air capture and what the recent DOE announcement means for getting that method up and running to a greater degree in the United States. So to that end, we have a esteemed list of speakers who we're going to be hearing from very shortly to talk through logistics. If you have questions, comments for the panel, please share them in the chat. We're going to be getting started shortly with maybe 35 to 40 minutes of discussion, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. So at any time, feel free to pose a question in the chat, and then either myself or Deborah Graywolf, our operations manager, hi Deborah, will see that question and pose it to the panel ultimately. So with that in mind, I just want to say once again, thank you for coming. And at the tail end of everything, we will stop the recording at the top of the hour again, and then go into networking for 30 minutes afterwards, if you wish to stay. Not everyone does. That's totally okay. Everyone's extraordinarily busy, but we'll have Zoom breakout rooms after the main part of the discussion is over after 60 minutes. So anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to hand the floor to Justine Davids from Carbon Direct, who is our esteemed moderator. Justine, take it away.
Hello all, and thank you for attending. It's great to be here, and also big thank you to AirMiners as well for organizing this. So my background's in chemical engineering and material science and engineering, as well as research in the carbon management sector, and I also work at Carbon Direct. So before diving into content surrounding the bipartisan infrastructure law funded regional direct air capture hubs, or DAC Hubs, program, it would be great to go around for the audience to give brief introductions. Courtney, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Justine, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. My name is Courtney Holness. I am a senior policy advisor at Carbon 180. I have been with the organization for about 3 years, and we are really focused on federal policy to advance carbon removal solutions in ways that are equitable and just and science-driven. So I'm really excited today to come and talk about DAC, which is something that I've been working on and thinking about over the past few years. And kick it over to the next panelist, Vikrum, maybe?
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Vikrum Aiyer. I'm the head of public policy for Heirloom. Heirloom is a direct air capture company that uses a technology that empowers limestone to help sponge CO2 directly from the atmosphere. I oversee our government relations and our climate justice strategies and our community engagement work, a lot of which is critical to the execution of the DAC Hub programming. And previously, I used to work for the ACLU as well as the Obama administration. So I feel relatively new to carbon removal, but hugely grateful to the AirMiners community because that has allowed me to step in with a little bit more confidence. So good to be with you all today. And I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Vikram. I'm Jason Hochman. I'm the co-founder and senior director of the Direct Air Capture Coalition, a global nonprofit multi-stakeholder coalition of, as of today, 100 companies, civil society groups, environmental NGOs, and research and academic institutions working together to help advance and accelerate the development and deployment of direct air capture technology to play a critical role in the fight against climate change. We seek to act as a global platform for education, collaboration, and connectivity throughout this emerging market ecosystem. And I'll hand it back over to Justine.
Perfect. Thank you all. So we're here to talk a bit about DAC Hubs. DOE announced 21 selections, 14 at the very early stage of exploring partnerships, 5 at the preliminary design stage, and 2 at the advanced stage of detailed engineering. The intent of the program is to support 4 fully mature hubs at the 1 million ton per year level. To kick us off, what do you all think the impact of the DAC hubs will be on the overall DAC ecosystem?
So I can get started. I think that it will have a tremendously catalytic impact on this emerging ecosystem. I think that, well, for one, just as a matter of fact, it's by far the largest investment in history by any government or entity in the development of carbon removal technology. And I think that the structure of this program and bringing together different companies, researchers, actors throughout the value chain is really meant to help spur innovation, learning by doing, deployment-led innovation. I think that it's a really tremendous opportunity for this technology to get deployed and for the folks working on this to be able to learn how it is operating and to make it more effective, more efficient over time. The direct air capture systems that we have today will not be the direct air capture systems that we have in 2030, will not be the ones that we have in 2050. And that will in part be spurred by the efforts of the companies that are involved in designing, building, operating, and maintaining these hubs.
Yeah, I would love to jump in on this one as well. I think that, as Jason said, this is some of the largest investment that we've seen in some of these technologies. And so with this influx of federal support, the field is really sitting at this nexus of opportunity and resources, right? We have a real opportunity and chance to redress some of the past injustices that we've seen and create community benefits. And also we're seeing funding, we need funding to actually build these projects that can deliver on the vision that we're starting to see being built. And because these are some of the earliest days of the sector, we have this opportunity to really take carbon out of the atmosphere in a way that's going to ensure a livable future where everybody can thrive. And, these initial projects are going to be around for a long time. When we think about infrastructure, we think about like bridges. Those are around for scales of decades. And so how we get these first projects off the ground, how we implement this program and build these hubs really matters. And the government is really going to need to uphold those commitments that they're making to equity and justice, not just on paper, but throughout sort of all stages of the projects. And I will say that also this is like the first introduction to policymakers and the public in the US. So success for this program is really going to be tied inherently to trust and perception. And because it's still that first introduction, people are still forming opinions and still learning about like what this means for climate and communities. And so this is really just going to start setting the stage for how we can evaluate the program. And I think it's going to be important to like hold space for people to reach alignment and propose alternatives, things like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what Courtni laid out is spot on in terms of the impact of this funding announcement from the Biden administration. I might take a step back as one of the technology providers that is a recipient of some of this funding. Let me tell you a little bit about the tech and then why we think this funding is actually so catalytic for the sector. So just a quick primer, Heirloom uses a very earth abundant material, limestone. It's not very sexy. It's about 4% of the Earth's crust, 4% of the Earth, I should say, is covered in limestone. You can find it in very much daily items, like in your classroom, chalk is full of limestone. And rooted in some PhD research from just about 3 years ago, we've discovered that if you're able to remove a molecule of carbon from that limestone, to go back to our high school chemistry days, that limestone gets pretty unstable. And in order to go back to its resting state, it just naturally wants to sponge up as much CO2 out of the air as possible. So we put limestone on these baking sheets. Think of the same sort of baking tray you might use to bake cookies at home. We stack them up and across, limestone, steel, baking trays, and then we have our process that is starting to sponge CO2 out of the air. On the one hand, that can sound kind of simple when it comes to a direct air capture technology. We think of these huge sophisticated systems, but what Heirloom's been able to do with its IP is supercharge a naturally occurring process where limestone binds to CO2. On the other hand, building that takes capital and it takes investment. And so far, we've been buttressed by private sector capital from the venture capital community, as well as individual company buyers who want to purchase CO2 removals from us. Your JP JP Morgans of the world or your Bains of the world. They're trying to do right by their ESG profiles and say, hey, we purchased these carbon removals, so we're doing right by the planet. That takes a company like ours or other direct air capture companies that are on this call today so far. But to have the catalytic investment of the public sector meet the private sector moment, it really unlocks, as Courtni says, a huge amount of momentum that's not just a signal at home in the United States to communities and lawmakers, but frankly, a huge signal to markets all over the country all over the world, where countries like Canada or continents like the European Union are all sort of racing to catch up with how they too can spend in this space. So unlocking that capital, allowing a company like ours that was just PhD research 3 years ago to be able to build at scale in facilities and in communities across the US, and unlocking jobs and learnings along the way is going to have huge insights. And I know we'll get into this, but the last thing I'll say is, even though we were one that was able to get a notice of selection of some funding, I think what's really exciting about what's about to happen is these hubs are going to be gravitational centers for a lot of work that's yet to come. Jason mentioned that these are just the early innings of the sector. The downstream impacts for smaller stage companies whose R&D is at different stages of maturity are going to be able to also participate down the road. And I think that's a really exciting feature of these hubs that we'll talk about in a little later in the program.
And thank you so much for these insights. Those are all really great points. I want to circle back to Courtni. You touched a little bit on benefits. What does it mean for DAC hubs to succeed, and how does Carbon 180 evaluate this success?
Thank you for the question. I think, we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we did sort of pitch a framework for how we can evaluate success. We wrote a white paper about it. I'm sure my AirMiners friends can plug that in the chat for folks. But I think from the top, trust is really going to underpin success for this field. And without that, we can really lose communities' support and willingness to host carbon removal solutions, but also taxpayers who are really supporting that funding to unlock massive capital investment, energy investment, human resources, and also supporting like the political will for this to happen. So as part of that trust piece, I think I would love to bring attention to, robust monitoring, reporting, and verification practices throughout the program. This is something that Carbon 180 views as a way to help build trust in the field. And as it is the process to directly account for the emissions, the energy use, and those environmental and public health impacts associated with the project. So it really tells us that work was done safely and effectively, and it provides receipts so that we can be held accountable for what we're saying. Are we gonna actually do what we're saying we're doing, right? So some of my colleagues have been thinking deeply about what it means to have high accountability monitoring, reporting, and verification, and actually build a tool to help break down some of these principles that we're thinking about in terms of directly accounting impacts and removals, and data transparency and things like that. I would go a level deeper to say that DAC hubs will and should only be successful if they're deployed on a foundation of equity and justice. And an equitable and just DAC hub is going to require well-informed and consenting communities. And so in the engagement process, we need to first and foremost acknowledge the community's history. That's going to be a really important step in thinking about how to move towards community ownership, where the vision for these hubs and what they might look like in any given region or community is really driven by that community and reflective of them, right? They are driving the vision for how this could look. So I touched on keeping communities informed of the decisions that are happening and impacting their health and well-being. And that's thinking about who is owning and operating the hubs, what are the quality of jobs associated with some of these hubs, and the integration of some of the other community priorities that folks might have, like increasing lighting, adding streetlights in their community, adding sidewalks, or maybe even the integration of other land-based solutions. I think we really need to be open to exploring and collaborating with communities to figure out like what this vision of success can look like, right? Like we've presented a framework, and I think what's really exciting about that is that it can be reviewed and iterated on, and like we want folks to be having this conversation about what that success could look like. And I'll touch on one more piece about just moving through this engagement spectrum from marginalization to sharing information and building capacity to actually collaborate and then fully have community ownership. So what does it look like for the community to have the capacity to be leaders in this work, and have that positive impact that they want to see?
Thank you for this. That was great. One requirement for insight for the audience for a hub to advance this later stage was a community benefits plan. So for our panelists, what do DAC hubs mean for communities which they're being established in, and what efforts are going to be made to get those communities involved? Vikrum, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I want to, as I do kick us off, I want to be very clear about one thing from our end, which is that for the hub recipient, so to speak, Heirloom is one company. We are part of that selection for this project in Southwest Louisiana, but really the project received the notification of selection of funding, which is Project Cypress. And Project Cypress is made up of a few different component companies. And that project in general, and it includes not just Heirloom, but our partners at Battelle, our partners and colleagues at Climeworks. And so as a project, I would say that sense of working in that community very much needs to take stock of the history of that community, as was just mentioned. But we also are very aware that Southwest Louisiana has long been seen and sort of pitched as a home to the energy industry. It has a huge bench of workforce talent, innovative capital, and geographic advantages to continue to allow Louisiana to be an energy center and an energy clean tech capital of the world. And so we feel that the right way to achieve that for Project Cypress is by partnering with community, as Courtni hinted at, to be very clear that we engage with and have open, honest, and robust dialogue with community groups, with environmental groups, with equity groups, to train and hire locally and educate and inform residents and leaders about what we're working on. But that can look that can come across in a couple of different ways. You know, first, I do think it's really important for us as a project to be listening in that community. And well before the Biden administration made its decision, Project Cypress and it was very clear about communicating with green groups, with local policy makers, with economic development organizations, even workforce security groups, food security groups, housing groups, transit groups, to really understand what's the landscape of that has helped previously help that community thrive or previously have been blockers to broader economic prosperity. And as we think about putting steel on the ground in that region, being mindful of all of those past dynamics that have informed who Southwest Louisiana is today, but also who Southwest Louisiana can be tomorrow, is all sort of integrated in how Project Cypress even thinks about that location. Now that we have this notice of selection from the Department of Energy, actually in just a couple of weeks, Project Cypress will be on the ground with the Biden administration and the Department of Energy to continue that work and actually talk individual group by individual group to understand, hey, we know Louisiana is a center of energy jobs, but like, what is your access to those jobs? What has that been like? And we know that local community colleges and vocational training programs have tried to upskill workers for new jobs. But as we bring online a new category of direct air capture work, how can we work with you to make sure we're training workers along that way? So that dialogue has already happened and it will continue to happen. And the next kind of flashpoint of that is later in September. We'll do that with the administration. But I want to be clear about one thing, and then I'll stop rambling. It's one thing for us to go into that community and just focus on the economic mobility that we think that this hub can create. That's really important because we want to make sure that these jobs aren't just something that sit in a little bit of a silo, but that we can openly communicate how people can break into these jobs locally. But at the same time, we need to, as a project that is a recipient of this funding, extend far beyond just job creation alone. And I think what Courtni hinted at is really important, and I want to underscore that as Project Cypress. If we're in a community and we hear that there are concerns about the fact that industrial footprints have showed up in that town previously, but they're lacking access to fresh produce, for example. Food security concerns are something that we often hear in that part of Louisiana. Then I do think that any new industrial footprint in that community also has a bit of an obligation and a responsibility to figure out what is its role when it comes to that social ailment or that issue. Separately, if we hear that there has been routine divestment from capital projects in Black or Brown communities in certain parts of that jurisdiction or region, I similarly feel that these projects also have an obligation to figure out what their investment strategy might be. That could look financial, that could look programmatic, that could look like funding existing food insecurity programs, that could look like funding K through 12 STEM education programs. But I think this is what the moment is calling for, which is if we're going to re-architect our industrial footprint and build new things in America and build them cleaner, then we also have a responsibility about how to be a good neighbor in that community. And that's something that Project Cypress is committed to. And I know countless hubs and countless recipients of different kinds of funding from TA1 and beyond are also thinking about around the country. And that's something that we're really excited about to do in the road ahead. Okay, sorry for rambling there, but I just wanted to lay that out.
And I'll just chime in briefly on this and echoing what Courtni and Vikram had to say. I think that there's a tremendous both opportunity and responsibility for the DAC sector broadly to be able to start in a way that is more mindful, more thoughtful, and more in line with the needs and the concerns of communities than other legacy industries. That direct air capture can be developed, deployed, and scaled in a manner that benefits communities and doesn't necessarily leave scars on communities or on the landscape. I also want to really emphasize how critically important community engagement and community buy-in is at this point in time. If these projects do not go well, if there is significant backlash from communities, it could really, for lack of a way to put it, poison the well for this entire sector. And it's very heartening to know that folks like Vikram are involved and have really thought deeply and are engaged with communities such that it can be an opportunity for communities to really reimagine themselves and see what they can potentially become in partnership with the DAC technology companies and the other consortium who will be involved in building out these plants.
I would love to add some color to the question about community benefits plans. So like we heard from Vikram and Jason, I think we're all sort of aligned on the fact that we first need to acknowledge concerns in the histories of communities, especially in the Gulf Coast, where they have been fence line communities to the oil and gas industry. And we've heard a lot of concerns about sort of this legacy continuing, right? And the continuation of procedural and distributive injustices. So just wanted to name that up front. I think that like this is our opportunity to sort of change how that looks. And we're hoping that, you know, through these community benefits plans that the Department of Energy is requiring as part of this program, we can start to change that. So I would want to add that community involvement and engagement is going to look different for every project, right? Communities are not a monolith. These projects are going to be in different places and folks are going to want different values and they're going to have different levels or desires to engage, right? Like are folks just wanting to necessarily be informed? Like maybe they don't have the information to actually make informed decisions. Or are we looking at folks who want to be collaborators on these projects? So thinking about that spectrum of engagement, but the Department of Energy requires a CBP, which is a community benefits plan. There are different requirements under those different topic areas. So topic area 1 is more of like a mapping of sort of what you plan to do. And by topic area 3, you should have a fully fleshed out sort of benefits plan. And these plans are weighted at 20% of the proposals, any given proposal's technical merit review. So more specifically, they look at a few different elements around community and labor engagement, investing in the American workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and Justice 40. And so we're really hopeful with these tools that we can set a higher standard for community involvement than we've seen in the past. And I would also add that the community benefits plans are a floor, right? We encourage and invite people to think about what it could look like to do more than just what DOE is requiring through this community benefits plan. And furthermore, community involvement doesn't stop with engagement. It's really about incorporating that input and that expert knowledge of lived experience in those areas and ensuring that it affects your project's processes and outcomes. And I say affects with an A, like we want this to have real tangible input, or like we want to see that have an effect on the way these projects are being implemented. And lastly, I would just say that, through the announcement, we don't actually know the specifics of these projects' community benefits plans. They're not publicly available. And so communities don't even necessarily know what's in there. And now I think it's on, project applications and developers to really sort of, start taking those initial steps to like have those conversations and potentially flip that on the head and start involving communities in the development of those plans instead of sort of already coming to the community with what we might think looks like benefits or things like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this insight, Courtni. How can startups get involved with DAC Hubs? How is this something that people who are watching that might be early stage get involved? Jason, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the first thing I want to note is that the announcement that went out earlier this month that awarded $1.2 billion or made available $1.2 billion to the 21 projects, that is only a portion of the programmatic funding that will be made available. It is in total a $3.5 billion program, and we can expect further FOAs or funding opportunity announcements to come in the next year or so. So I also want to highlight many companies are earlier stage in that the Department of Energy also has set up the Direct Air Capture Commercial Prize and Pre-Commercial Prize programs. The Pre-Commercial Prize, the deadline comes up towards the end of September, so I just want to flag that for folks. In terms of how different startups can get involved with DAC Hubs, I will shamelessly plug my organization, the Direct Air Capture Coalition, because what we're really trying to do is help build out and to serve as the connective tissue for this space. Many of our member companies, partner organizations, research and academic institutions are involved in the hubs that have been selected, which are spread across 15 different states. And I think that being able to understand who is involved in the hubs, where they are located, and just be able to reach out and see how your teams can plug in will be very valuable, because most of the projects that have been awarded are in that feasibility study phase. So there is going to be room for those to grow over time. I will also put another shameless plug in for the Global Direct Air Capture Conference that we are organizing alongside Rocky Mountain Institute, Breakthrough Energy, and Columbia University's Carbon Tech Development Initiative, which is taking place October 16th and 17th in New York City. You will have the opportunity there to meet and interact with many of the folks who are involved in these hubs and are on the ground trying to get this technology developed, tested, and deployed. I'm going to pop the link to the website in the chat and encourage, once this call is over, to check it out.
Yeah, I would just add on top of that, I mean, just to underscore Jason's point, Heirloom is a startup. Granted, we like to feel that we're pretty mature in terms of what we've been able to achieve in the last few years, but we are a startup, and I think that the one clarion call for everyone here is to apply, where you see funding opportunities, both at the federal level, but certainly at the state level. I'm happy to share my email address after the call as well, if any individual companies or startups on the call have questions about how to go about applying to these various funding opportunities, or whether there's a right fit for them individually. I'll also say, kind of more in terms of the longer term vision here, for some of the hubs that were funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, there is a little bit of a consistent playbook for what their vision is here. Yes, they have selected a bench of a few companies to start, but these hubs, as they kind of take root over time, can certainly be gravitational centers for startups of all stripes to also come to those regions and continue to advance the work of carbon removal across different technology pathways. And here's a quick example. The Obama administration, I was talking to Jason and Courtni a little bit about this yesterday, but the Obama administration had something called advanced manufacturing hubs, where they invested in a specific technology in different parts of the country. One of them was a 3D printing technology in Youngstown, Ohio. And all of a sudden, that one town became a cluster for other additive manufacturing, other 3D printing type of technologies to come and service the supply chain of the big companies that they funded, as well as create other sort of offshoot technologies that could co-locate on site as well. So I think one thing that's going to be really interesting to watch is, as these different hubs have their negotiations with the Department of Energy about the timeline and the milestones that they'll seek to meet to unlock the full scale of funding that had been committed and announced, how that kind of gravitational center applies to other startups is going to be really key, because that's going to really create the overall ecosystem, both in those regions, but also different parts of the country. So I would definitely encourage all of us to make sure that we're paying attention to what kind of co-working opportunities take place in these regions. But if anyone has any questions about how your startup could potentially think about navigating these funding opportunities, don't hesitate to holler or reach out if we could be helpful in trading notes from the Heirloom side.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into some of the sentiment that I was going to share, in the sense that, we're looking at 3 different topic areas in the Direct Air Capture Hubs program. And so the TA3 applications are ready to start sort of constructing and seeing this come to life. And so there are going to be so many learnings that we get from these first projects, both in the technical needs, the infrastructure needs as it relates to like acquiring permits and things like that. So I would really encourage folks to sort of not operate in silos and seek out collaboration and learning. And, Vikram is saying, like, don't be shy to come, ask and exchange notes and things like that. So I think that's really awesome. I think, for the topic area 1 and 2 sections, it could be really interesting to start, thinking a little bit more about the other elements of the ecosystem. So thinking about, like, how can we innovate or think more on the monitoring, reporting, and verification piece about our technologies or our proposed projects. There's so much work to be done in that space. And also how we can like continue to just build equity and justice into this foundation. And so Carbon 180 actually partnered with X Prize to write a report about how startups can be thinking about incorporating environmental justice directly into their business plans. And, it includes recommendations to start demonstrating that commitment to learning from past injustices and setting themselves on a path to scale in sustainable ways that, garner support from society. And so from that perspective, it's like, really, it's moving from EJ is nice to have, which is, a perception that a lot of folks hold, and operating in ways that are credible and legitimate and, deserving of trust. So how can we think about really integrating environmental justice, not into the projects that we do, but into the very like business structure that you have? So I would offer that as something to think about.
100%. That's a great point, that environmental justice should be at the forefront of the mind during these discussions. Jason, I want to circle back a little bit. How do you see the DAC hubs affecting the overall supply, innovation, and then public perception of direct air capture?
Well, in terms of the total supply, these hubs are supposed to, or the target for them is to be able to capture and sequester up to 1 million tons annually. So that alone is a tremendous increase from current capture capacity and volume. It is nowhere near where we need to go by 2050, but helping to build out the infrastructure, the supply chains, the knowledge, the human capital for direct air capture, that is one way that the direct air capture hubs will be really, really core to the overall supply and efficacy and effectiveness of this sector. In terms of the public perception, I think totally echoing what Courtni had to say and what Vikram has said prior, that this really is vital to the outlook, to the future of this sector, and public and both public perception and government public sector support. So if these are done well, if they're done in concert and in line with the values and the priorities and the concerns of communities, that really will go a long way in creating a sustainable and resilient kind of level of support for direct air capture. If it is co-opted by bad actors, or if it is implemented in a manner that generates pushback, it could really play into some damaging narratives that really impact the broader credibility of this space. And it's so important that this is done well, because this is essential. At the highest level, the UN IPCC has made clear that large-scale carbon removal is essential and unavoidable to meeting our goals. So this needs to be done well. And I think that's really where the bottom line is with the direct air capture hubs.
Yeah, if I want to kind of build on that point, if that's okay, Justine, that there's navigating that line correctly is going to be really, really hard work. And it's going to be hard work, particularly for a lot of these earlier stage companies who are probably limited in resources in terms of how to navigate some of the historical realities on the ground, as well as how the new facility of a direct air capture hub funded by the administration can pave the way forward. And let me give you a quick example. There was a question earlier in there about the Central Valley, for example, of California, which has a long history of not only oil and gas interests in the area, but also challenged air quality as a result of a lot of different pollutants. If you think about a direct air capture company or a carbon removal company setting up shop there, they may take steps to really, really educate how the tech works and what their tech is doing or not doing when it comes to air quality and water quality impacts. That corporation alone may be able to share its thoughts, but that community-based organizations or EJ-based organizations may not just trust the corporation alone just because they said, hey, we have minimal air quality impacts. So in that instance, the company may need to evolve its approach and think a lot about how it wants to share its data, probably sensitive data, maybe proprietary data, but share its data with the community. So that way third-party groups, EJ groups, can analyze the particulate matter release and make their own decisions about an air quality impact, as opposed to just trusting that corporation alone. Separately, but similarly, if you think about Southwest Louisiana or parts of Louisiana, I know we've talked about addressing the injustices of the fossil fuel industry's past, but companies that set up shop there have to be mindful that a lot of those energy majors continue to employ workers in those communities. And so being mindful of the fact that a lot of the jobs required for the chemistry, the geology, the underground injections when it comes to this can benefit from some of the talent and the skills that exist within those communities, even if they're employed by some of the extractive industries that have created the challenges in the region, is also going to be a needle that those companies need to thread. So region by region, you're going to have to confront both the needs of the community and do something that's responsive to it, but you're also going to have to thread a fair amount of political and social lines that will create some pressures in both directions. And I think not having the answer to that is completely okay. But as Courtni pointed out, procedurally being willing to talk about it with the community openly and honestly is a vital step that we should all be watching these hubs and hold them to account to do that. So that way we can at least have that conversation out in the open without necessarily assuming that there's one surefire way to fix this and get it done, because it's going to take time and it's going to be a lot of hard work as well.
Perfect. Thank you for this. And I want to hand it over to Courtni to also provide some insight. And following this, we'll start answering your questions that you've been putting in the chat from the audience. Courtni?
Thanks, Justine. I also just want to echo Vikram's point about like not necessarily always having answers to these questions, but the willingness to like have the conversation and talk through what it means to come up with an answer. And also wanting to share, you know, as we're talking about impacts about some of these projects, Carbon 180 is a part of a coalition that's led by the Center of Law, Energy, and the Environment at University of California, Berkeley. And we applied for funding for a DAC Hub, which we were accepted and moving into award negotiations. We are a Topic Area 1 hub, and we're really looking at exploring the feasibility of establishing a community-led, community-owned direct air capture hub in California's southern San Joaquin Valley. And our real mission here is to aim to co-develop a concept from the ground up that centers some of the things we've been talking about, like procedural and distributive justice, racial and economic equity, community benefits, environmental justice, and a just transition for those who have been historically marginalized in the Central Valley. And so what we're hoping our impact can be is to really offer a new paradigm for working hand in hand with communities and prioritizing their needs in climate and energy transitions and making sure that it's reflective and representative of a community, and trying to start creating a gold standard of like, what does it look like to have meaningful community involvement and to have strong community benefits plans that are, you know, moving from the floor of what's required. So wanted to share that. We have some information on our website about what we're doing and how we're thinking about it, and happy to answer more questions. So I'll pass it back over to Justine so we can jump into audience Q&A.
Perfect. Sounds good. And thank you for everyone for putting your questions in the chat throughout. They've been written down as we've been going. So I want to kick it off with, given the discussion on local communities, how many jobs does a project like Project Cypress create, both in construction, which is temporary, and operations and maintenance?
I could start, you know, unfortunately don't have a satisfying answer to that quite yet. We are in conversations with the Department of Energy about a bunch of kind of mechanical features to how the project will be set up. So stay tuned for more information about that. That being said, I will just say outside of the DAC hubs, generally, when it comes to job count, you know, outside of DAC hubs, Heirloom has been able to work on facilities in other parts of the country. And as we have conversations with labor unions or local government stakeholders to talk about incentives or just our project approach, one thing that's really important, I feel, is like not to overzealously sell that this is going to create millions of jobs overnight. To begin with, it's going to create a category of construction jobs, and then it's going to create the operations and maintenance jobs. Those right now are going to be coming online and will be I'm sure they will vary from project to project, and they'll vary from company to company within the direct air capture space, as well as other CDR technology pathways. It's okay if those numbers start with just the few or the handful to begin with, and if there's a scale up over time, because like, I think one of the more important features is really being able to create a workforce development program that assesses what is the background, what is the specifications, and what are the skills required to do these jobs, and then export those learnings about how to do those jobs with labor unions, with technical training programs, with community colleges, with vocational certification programs, so that way we can upskill workers into that. So for any startups on the call today or founders that are on the call today, just be mindful of that. Less so about needing to sell a vision of millions of jobs overnight, and more so being able to drill down on what does this job look like? How do we make sure it's good quality? And how do we make sure that we're training people for it? So I know I didn't really quite answer the question from the DAC Hub specific vantage point, but I just wanted to make that clear as people think about job construction in the road ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vikram. Courtni, do you have a few things to add?
I was just going to add that there is a resource from the Rhodium Group that talks about jobs in the direct air capture sector. And I think that we can hope to be expecting to see sort of a more in-depth analysis of this later this fall. So I would just keep an eye out for the Rhodium Group and what they're going to publish around this jobs conversation in direct air capture.
Yes, and just building on that, I popped in to the chat analysis that Rhodium Group had put together in 2020 that found that for a megaton scale facility, which is 1 million tons, which is what the DAC hubs are aspiring to, but far beyond what we have today, would create 3,500 jobs throughout, directly and indirectly throughout the value chain.
Thanks so much, Jason. It seems that we have a few audience members that are asking some sort of variation of this question. So specific to the actual hub, what kind of milestones must be met to unlock funding? Are there technical or commercial hurdles to unlock the different tranches of funding? And what are the tranche amounts?
I can start. We are in conversation with the Department of Energy right now about that, so we're not able to share specific milestones, at least for the Project Cypress project. But I can answer the question as saying yes, there are different milestones that will need to be cleared in order to unlock different sums of money, which is why the FOA that initially announced DAC Hubs back in December kind of has an overall pot of money that can be achieved based off of unlocking different milestones. But those milestones will vary from project to project. And as Courtni knows for their TA1 work, it's going to be kind of decided in conversation with the DOE. So stay tuned for what that looks like. We're only a few weeks into this project since the White House announcement. So we got a little work to do there.
Perfect. Courtni or Jason, or do you want to move to the next one?
I think what I heard reflected in the question was also related to like how much funding some of these projects have received. And so I would just point to the funding opportunity announcement, which showed that under these 3 topic areas, a TA3 hub or something that's ready to be constructed can receive up to $1 billion in funding. The topic area 2 hubs, which are sort of in their design phase, can receive up to $25 million worth of funding. And then the topic area 1, which is all about feasibility studies, can receive, I think it's $3 million, up to $3 million worth of funding. And I would just, echo what Vikram was saying. There are certain like go, no go decision points along the way. And so that's going to involve, conversations with the Department of Energy and also consultation with the community once again to make sure that, what's been outlined in the project plans are being met. And if not, then there are possible consequences that could come through that.
Perfect. Another question from the audience is, how many years is it going to take to get to the 1 million ton volume for a given project? And what are the technical challenges associated with this? Vikram, do you want to start us off?
Sorry, can you add more color to that, or was the question just that?
Yep, it was how many years will it take to get to 1 million tons annually, and what are the technical challenges that are associated?
I think, well, for right now, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're working through what those project milestones will look like. So stay tuned for exact unlocks. But for, zooming out of the DAC Hub specifically, Heirloom as a company is on the road to unlocking or removing about 1 billion tons by 2035. And we're doing that by, that system that I mentioned earlier that uses limestone and steel to kind of lay things out on trays. is modular, meaning that we can, a facility that might capture up to 1,000 tons of CO2 in one part of the country, but wants to graduate up to 200,000 tons of CO2 per year in another part of the country, is able to use that same sort of format, but just kind of at a larger scale in different region. And so our vision as just Heirloom, and this isn't speaking on behalf of other Project Hub winners for the DAC Hub side, is to take that modular system and manufacture it at scale, so that way we can use the same component parts much quicker and reassemble them much quicker than we are currently today, to get to 100,000 tons of CO2 per year per facility, and build those facilities all over the country and all over the world. So we think, based off of where we are today with our private capital that's funded Heirloom's project so far, as well as this new infusion of public sector funding through the DAC Hub programming, and manufacturing long term, we will be able to get there within the next 7 to 10 years from an Heirloom perspective. But I do think one of the more exciting pieces of this is going to be how the DOE interacts with each of the project hubs to make sure that their milestones are met. And that's going to be a little bit different project by project based off of the technology pathway that's included in that project. So, how we do it with Limestone might vary from another company's engineered approach. So again, perhaps not the most satisfying answer, and sorry to seem somewhat dodgy, but that's at least the answer from how Heirloom's technology currently is and on the roadmap that it's on.
I'll chime in here, and I'll make a couple points. One, I've just popped into the chat a recent International Energy Agency IEA analysis, kind of progress report on direct air capture. And within that report, they talk about how many plants are operating, how many are in advanced stages of development, how many are in planning stages. There have been 27 DAC plants commissioned in Europe, North America, Japan, and the Middle East. For direct air capture to play the role that the IEA analysis projects that it would need to play in a net zero scenario, it would need to reach, I believe, 75 million tons annually by 2030 and up to 1 billion by 2050. And I think that it's really, really important for the direct air capture community, for carbon removal more broadly, to effectively manage expectations, and that this is a marathon. This is going to take a significant amount of time. We're not going to be seeing DAC facilities line the landscape in the next year or two. And I think we all need to be very cognizant and mindful of that, because we cannot have a situation where everyone's very excited about this and then the bubble bursts in a year because we're not seeing enough progress. This is going to take a long time, and it has the potential to play a critical role in the fight against climate change. And if you're a DAC company, to benefit from what Bloomberg New Energy Finance put out a report yesterday, that by 2050, this will be a $150 billion market. So I just really want to emphasize that the critical role of understanding that this is a long-term project, and that everyone here is still, everyone in the space is still developing their technology, is still refining it, is still making it more effective. Vikram has spoken about Heirloom's very exciting, DAC methods, but there are a broad array of different approaches being researched, being tested, being developed, and deployed. And I just really want to emphasize that point.
One thing I might just add to that too, in terms of, I think it's a great point. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And so some of even like the metrics that we as a CDR community are very excited by or interested in terms of when we clear key hurdles of millions of tons or billions of tons removed. I think one thing that we need to be mindful of is also the cost here. That's another big reason why the DAC hubs are so catalytic, in my opinion, because for some technology pathways, there's a huge capital expenditure required to actually build these facilities. So the DAC hub investments helps. However, the price per ton to remove the CO2 if it's only buttressed by money earmarked in the bipartisan infrastructure law or money earmarked in the IRA and some private companies that are buying removals through offtake agreements, that alone is not really going to get us as a country or a planet to the gigaton scale of removals that we need to meet the UN climate math of 1.5 degrees. So to get there and to bend down the cost curve of not only how much it takes to build these removal facilities, but also to be able to sell them at a much lower cost, $300 a ton, $100 a ton, as one of the questions put in here. We're going to need, I think, a lot more government intervention of the customer profile. Right now we have private buyers, but we're also going to need the government to put its money where its mouth is and be a direct procurer of removals. We've seen legislative proposals in states like Massachusetts and New York, where the government is buying removals directly in terms of procurement. And then we've also seen proposals like in states where I live, like California, where the government entertains a compliance framework where someone who's an emitter has to account for the purchasing of removals in their portfolio. So private offtake agreements plus procurement agreements plus compliance agreements plus DAC Hub funding, all of that is going to shape how we clear these key markers that we assign ourselves of 1 million by X or 1 billion by Y. And I think we're all going to need to lobby and petition government to continue that work and not just rest its laurels on the IRA or the infrastructure law alone.
Thank you so much for this response, and to the audience for submitting all of your great questions. It's about that time where I need to hand it back over to Jason for closing remarks.
Hey, everyone. So thank you, Justine, and thank you, Jason H., and thank you, Courtni, and thank you, Vikrum, for an excellent discussion today. Again, this is just the start. So we will be tracking the activities in DAC hubs all around the country, because I can tell you from working with launchpad teams and other people in direct air capture that this has garnered international recognition as signifying that the United States is a place for direct air capture activity, and people are quite interested around the world. Sharing some links right now as we close up. First, we'd love to hear about what we did well and what we did not do so well, so that we can provide better content, better programming for you, our audience. Next, I put the panelist emails. Lots of questions were asked in the chat. Unfortunately, we have very limited time to get to all of them. So if you have a particular question you want to pose of the panel, or then feel free to contact them at the emails that I list here. Also, noting that in AirMiners, our Kiloton Fund is accepting applications through September 15th. Check out our FAQ event from a couple of weeks ago about that and what that might mean for early stage startups who are interested in finding a pre-purchaser for carbon credits to be delivered in 2030. Finally, tomorrow, our DAC programming continues. Hey, in that we have an ideas, needs, and leads session for people to talk about their brand new ideas and generate leads for what they would like to do to get their direct air capture specific method of removing carbon dioxide off the ground, get that going forward. The idea is to talk about your idea for a minute, get others in the networking session to jump in, and then go from there. We hold these by different methods. We've done one on biomass, we've done one on oceans, we've done one on MRV. Now we're going to do one on DAC, which dovetails very nicely with all the DAC activity, as well as our event today, and the DOE event in Pittsburgh, where Vikrum is right now, with the National Energy Technology Labs, which is very focused on direct air capture. Without any further ado, I just want to say once more, thank you again. We look forward to hearing your questions, hearing what you thought of our event, and seeing you at the next AirMiners event, which will be announced on our calendar shortly. So looks like it will be how to scale from pilot to first of a kind and nth of a kind plant and beyond. That's the topic that we're going to be discussing in about 2 weeks' time. So be on the lookout for that particular ticketing page that will be available soon.